Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, the pariah of the entire polling industry. Now, there's a bunch of reasons, I'm sure you can think of a few, that we're pariahs, but one of the big ones is because, unlike anybody else in the polling industry, we were actually interested in what Americans thought about COVID and the vaccine safety situation. And let me tell you, that made us a lot of enemies. We picked up a whole bunch of stalker fans like Philip Bump and Glenn Kessler, fact checker extraordinaires. But we're here to tell you that we have more news about COVID. And so we find ourselves in a very familiar situation where we flirt with the YouTube censors, risking medical disinformation strikes and demonetization, when all we're trying to do is bring you public opinion fact. We ask some people some new questions, and you're going to hear the numbers. Now, if you're catching up, we have an absolutely massive body of work on this subject. In fact, our polling on vaccine safety landed us in the top 50 list of spreaders of disinformation on Twitter. According to the government, they really wanted us shut down, and we got nobody in the mainstream industry will even acknowledge that we exist. I think pharmaceutical advertising is likely one of the main reasons, and hopefully there's a new sheriff in town because it looks like a major change agent is coming to DC, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But just to catch you up, we found out a lot of really potentially horrifying stuff. Now, again, I'm not, drawing conclusions. I'm just saying that if these numbers are to be believed, and I think they are, because these are the same polling methodologies that we use to predict the election win for Donald Trump, then it is likely that there's something really bad going on that needs to be investigated. And really, the first surprising finding, we were the ones that came out and proved that according to Americans, there was a really big major side effect rate for the vaccine. Amongst vaccinated Americans, 7% self-reported that they had a major side effect, and a combined total of 41% said they had a major or minor side effect. And then here's some crosstabs from, a smattering of other questions. Again, we asked many questions many times and still found the same signal every time. In fact, the signal about concerns of vaccine safety are going up over time, not going down. Usually, if there's a big flap, people will forget about it over time, but this is not something that's going away. How likely is it that side effects of COVID-19 vaccines have caused a significant number of unexplained deaths? And this is just from about 3 months ago. So not that long ago, people are not concerned about COVID anymore. And yet they're still concerned about this because 30% of all Americans say very likely, another 25% say somewhat, for a really astounding strong majority of 55% saying it's likely side effects of COVID-19 vaccines have caused a significant number of unexplained deaths. Only 14% say not at all likely. This is, it's just ubiquitous. Men and women agree by a majority, and there's not much of an age signal. Everybody pretty much agrees. And even among race, in fact, Black Americans are more likely to think the vaccines are dangerous. 45% of Democrats, however, and these are the same Democrats that are watching CNN, MSNBC, those outlets are still saying the vaccines are super safe and effective, guys. Go out and get boosted for a 58th time. 24% of Democrats say it is very likely. Only 22% say not at all likely. Again, these people worship Anthony Fauci, and yet here they are. Only 49% of Democrats say it's not likely COVID-19 vaccines, not a majority, are causing significant number of unexplained deaths. But it's a pretty huge majority of Republicans, although not all of them. 66% say it's at least somewhat likely. 39% say very likely. And independents are pretty high too, 57%. 30% say very likely. This one's pretty wild, though. Look at this. This is the street smart signal. The more educated you are, the less likely you think it is that COVID vaccines are potentially killing people. Only 18% of people with graduate degrees say it's very likely. This is a really important signal. This kind of shows you what's going on with woke culture and luxury beliefs, people who have graduate degrees are really invested in the entire system. They spend a lot of time in these institutions. They have high-paying jobs surrounded by other people with the same kind of degrees, and only 18% of them think it's very likely. That's a really low number. And this 25% who say not at all likely is one of the highest numbers here. Do we have Yeah, I mean, it's like Democrats, it's only 22%. Nobody else breaks 20, except for incomes over 200K, 34%, not at all likely, bought into the system. Maybe we got a lot of like pharmaceutical R&D directors in this sample, who knows? Only 17% of incomes over 200K say it's very likely. Wild. Do you personally know anyone whose death you think may have been caused by side effects of the COVID-19 vaccines? So this isn't like how likely is it that it's, killing maybe a news anchor or somebody playing soccer. This is people who say they know someone personally. 28% of Americans, more than 1 in 4, only 60% say no. Men and women, pretty much the same number across all age, pretty much the same number among race, except Hispanic Americans are more likely to say yes. 4 in 10 Hispanic Americans say they know someone personally whose death they think may have been caused by side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine. But 21% of Democrats, only 71% of Democrats say no. 33% of Republicans. So look how close Republicans and Democrats are to each other. I think a cynic would say, well, Republicans is probably 100. Democrats is probably 0. They're only 12 points apart. And independents are right there with Republicans. It's not an ideological signal at all. People are smart. People geared towards staying alive, all hundreds of thousands of years of instinct. They see something dangerous, it gets burned into the retina. And again, graduate schools here, it's lower than everybody else, but they're not that far apart. Which is closer to your belief? There are legitimate reasons to be concerned about the safety of COVID-19 vaccines, or people who worry about vaccine safety are spreading conspiracy theories. And this is a question about gaslighting, of which there has been a heck of a lot over the last 4 years. Gaslighting about Trump being a criminal, gaslighting about political persecution that Trump was going to do of his political enemies, gaslighting about the invasion at the southern border, gaslighting about the danger of COVID, 6 feet to slow the spread, guys. Totally wear your N95. And gaslighting about the vaccine. And so what you would see is ubiquitously in every mainstream outlet, not just the news, the New York Times, the networks, the cable TV channels, the vaccine was safe and effective. People who question the vaccine are conspiracy theorists. The gaslighting was so strong that half of Joe Biden's strong approvers wanted to imprison people who questioned the efficacy of the vaccines. And yet, among all Americans, only 37% say concerns about vaccine safety are conspiracy theories. Almost half, 48%, a strong plurality, say there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about the safety of COVID-19 vaccines. The establishment was totally willing to just sweep this under the rug. If Kamala Harris got elected, you would never hear hide nor hair out of the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry, the news. There would have been no investigative reports. Congress wouldn't have cared. It totally would have gone away. And yet half of Americans are concerned about the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. What would happen is we'd have another pandemic, potentially a more dangerous one. And a lot of people concerned about the safety of mRNA vaccines would not take a new vaccine, even if it was safe, even if it was necessary to prevent a really dangerous virus. That's wild. That's potentially what could have happened. Again, not drawing conclusions. I'm just, spitballing here about what kind of things can happen when you gaslight people. Men and women, pretty close. Again, no age signal. Not much of a race signal, although Hispanic Americans are more concerned. And 36% of Democrats legitimate reasons to be concerned about the safety of COVID-19 vaccines. They do not care about this topic, about what they're being told on CNN and MSNBC. 60% of Republicans, a lot of Republicans took the vaccines. A lot of Republicans bought into the whole stuff that, 27% think it's conspiracy theories, but independents, 48% to 29%. They're really open-minded. That's one of the reasons why Trump won. But let's talk about new happenings. Article out of the New York Post, December 6th. The FDA must disclose more COVID-19 vaccine records, U.S. judge rules. A federal judge has ordered the U.S. FDA to publicly disclose more information underpinning its authorization of COVID-19 vaccines after failing to persuade the court to end public records lawsuits. In a ruling on Friday, U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman in Fort Worth, Texas, go Texas, ordered the agency to produce its emergency use authorization file to a group of scientists who wanted to see licensing information that the FDA relied on to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine. The COVID-19 pandemic is long past, and so has any legitimate reason for concealing the American people from the American people the information relied upon by the government in approving the Pfizer vaccine. Yeah, okay, that's fair, wrote Pittman, appointed in 2019 by then President Donald J. Trump. You're getting transparency. That's what your vote for Donald Trump got you. The lawsuit, filed in late 2021, attracted attention after the FDA said it could take decades to process and disclose records to public health and medical professionals for transparency, the group that brought the case stated. Didn't they have to produce those documents to the FDA? Like, can't they just copy and paste the emails or hit print? The FDA declined to comment. Yeah, of course. This is wild. This stuff's going to come out. I think it's coming out next June. And Americans are really happy. Here are the questions we asked. The federal court has now ordered the FDA to release previously hidden COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials data by next June. Should this data have been made public before the vaccine was recommended to the public? Yeah, I don't know. That sounds like a reasonable ask. And 71% of likely voters agree with that statement. Only 15% say no. 15% of likely voters are not concerned about transparency around stuff that these people probably ubiquitously put into their bodies. No gender, no age signal, no race signal. Black 63% yes, white 72% yes, and not much of a party signal either. 61% of Democrats say, yeah, this data should have been released publicly. And 81% of Republicans, 71% of independents. Strong bipartisan support. And yet, I suspect that we haven't heard the end of resistance to releasing this data. Are there any other interesting signals? 59% of liberals say yes. That's one of the lower numbers. But again, income. People with incomes over 200K, less interested than anybody else. Only 50% say yes. 58% of people with graduate's degrees. And 48% of Joe Biden's strong approvers. These are the trust the government folks. How likely is it that the federal officials were engaged in covering up potentially harmful side effects of COVID-19 vaccines? So this isn't just like, is transparency good? This is like, was our own federal government potentially harming people by covering up information about the vaccines? 39% of likely voters say very likely, 23% say somewhat, 61%, 62%, I guess it rounds down. That's wild. Again, another situation where what would appear to be potentially a MAGA topic has strong bipartisan support, more support than Donald Trump did himself as a candidate, just like the situation on the border. This is another item in the list of things that the 2024 election was a referendum on: accountability for COVID. And again, one of the reasons why Donald Trump probably should have performed better than the 50% of the electorate he got. I really can't wait to get those election integrity investigations, but only 9% of likely voters say it is not at all likely. This is a massive signal about absolutely zero confidence in federal health officials. This is a dangerous vote of no confidence by voters about the people who they pay taxes for to protect their health. Absolutely horrifying. Again, no gender signal, very little age signal. 18 to 39-year-olds are less likely to say very likely, but still just as likely as anybody else. No race signal. And again, there is a bit of a party signal, but 44% of Democrats say it's at least somewhat likely. Only 16% say not at all likely. That's not a lot of confidence. But Republicans, it's 80%. Only 3% of Republicans say not at all likely. And independents, pretty close to Republicans there, 60%, only 8% say not at all likely. Only 3 in 10 independents say it is not likely. Again, these are the independents that the Democrats really should have tried to get more votes from. They really could have said, I know a lot of people have concerns about COVID. In a new Harris administration, we're going to get to the bottom of the situation. We're going to find answers. There was no interest in that. Let's go out to the right again, though, just to see what we see. Self-ID'd liberals, only 35% say likely. Incomes over 200K, 35%. Graduate degrees more, higher here, 42%. What about Biden strong improvers? They're always, this is the lowest number. 34% of Biden strong improvers, although 19% of them still say it's very likely. And only 24% of them say not at all likely. It has been suggested that President Biden will issue a presidential pardon to Dr. Anthony Fauci. Would you approve or disapprove of Biden issuing a pardon to Dr. Fauci? Now, here's a little lesson in the Overton window. People want accountability. They don't like the situation that they got put through in COVID. A lot of them have concerns about vaccine safety. A lot of them have concerns about the kind of rules and shutdowns and closures and restrictions placed on their freedom. But a lot of people still kind of like Dr. Anthony Fauci. The total 100% press treatment of him as, paragon of government expertise and bureaucracy, somewhat effective, because 31% of Americans, likely voters, would strongly approve of a pardon, a preemptive pardon, no less. Another 14% somewhat. So that's 45%, which is a plurality because only 43% disapprove, although 33% strongly disapprove, more than the likely voters who strongly approve. And here there definitely is a party signal. 50% of Democrats strongly approve of a pardon, 17% somewhat, for a combined total of 2/3, but 29% of Democrats, but 19% of Democrats disapprove. 25% of Republicans approve, though. And 68% of Republicans disapprove. Yeah, that 25% of Republicans who approve, that's wild. But the thing is that we saw numbers of Republicans north of 60% who say they got vaccinated. A lot of Republicans still trust government officials, just not as much as Democrats. And among independents, 41% approve, 46% disapprove. So really it's being driven by Democrats here, although a pretty good chunk of independents approve. Only 27% strongly. But here's why, in my opinion, this is a fascinating topic that goes on a huge heap of things that are going to cause massive change in the next few months. Because as Donald Trump steps into office, he's been given a mandate to reform the federal government. And a quick look at his list of cabinet appointees show every single one of these people is strongly committed to massive change. And it looks right now, according to the betting markets, that most of them have a really good chance of getting in. Every single one of these is above 50%. The lowest is Tulsi Gabbard, 67%. RFK Jr. at 70%. But just think about what kind of change we're talking about. Trump has made enemies of a massive list of people. I mean, big military, the military industrial complex, Kash Patel, big intel, big law enforcement, weaponized law enforcement, RFK Jr., big health, big pharma, big food, big agriculture. Like literally everybody on earth, big media, everybody, big everything, big tech. They all hate the changes that Donald Trump is going to bring to this country. But let me tell you a little bit about RFK Jr. A lot of people know who he is. He was out there in a lot of interviews, but people might not know what has been his life work for the last few decades. It's this organization, Children's Health Defense, a really great organization. Here's their mission: a world free of childhood chronic health conditions caused by environmental exposures. This is a nonprofit that Kennedy put together to save children from the health epidemic, the poison that's been pumped into their bodies. Here he is. Here's his page. Chairman of the board and founder. And they put out a lot of content, a lot of news. Here's a quick look at their news page. Let's go to COVID. That's the number one category here. And what kind of stuff are we going to see? Pfizer failed to disclose deaths of 2 women in COVID vaccine clinical trials. Biologists warn of unknown risks of COVID vaccine DNA contamination. COVID vaccine shed study of menstrual irregularities. Vaccine makers get another free pass as Biden administration extends liability shield through 2029. Did COVID vaccines cost more lives than they saved? This is the person who's going to be addressing these situations. Like, this is wild. This is going to be RFK wrote the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, that Wikipedia here is panning as controversial conspiracy theory extravaganza. Kennedy promotes HIV/AIDS denialism and misinformation about Fauci's role during the HIV epidemic and the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States. Listen, if Wikipedia hates it, there's probably some pretty fascinating stuff in here. In the book, Kennedy accuses Fauci of pulling off a historic coup d'etat against Western democracy and promotes unproven COVID-19 treatments, including HCQ and ivermectin, the horse paste. The author shares his opinion that COVID-19 vaccines are not sufficiently safety tested and likens vaccine mandates in the United States to living under the rule of Nazi Germany. Man, Wikipedia is really not happy about this, and I'm pretty sure everybody else in the mainstream media, many of whom probably owe their massive, massive salaries to the ubiquitous pharmaceutical advertising on cable and network TV. But here's the problem: nobody's listening to them anymore. People are getting their news from folks like Joe Rogan, independent sources, authentic independent sources who are willing to think objectively and question the gaslighting psyops that we're all being subjected to. So I am really fascinated about what the next couple of years might mean. We may see massive accountability, huge shifts in the collective public psyche, and maybe finally the answers to the questions that most Americans have about the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. And guess who's going to be polling on it? Pretty much nobody else but us. So again, if you like that fact, make sure you like the video, follow us on YouTube or Rumble, click the subscribe button, and it's free and it really helps our information get to more people. Follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_poll, and thanks for watching.